think this shows the modern device that we're now going to be used to working with, compared to the older laptops that might have taken a couple of minutes to boot and load the operating system and probably gave you time to go and make a cup of tea before starting work. Unfortunately, those days are over now and we can get straight on with our work as soon as we hit the office. I think we knew that the Surface Pro device was 12.3 and that the iPad Pro was 13-inch. Until we actually got our hands on one, we didn't really realise that the width of the two devices is actually pretty much identical. So the screen width from bezel to bezel, the actual display area of the screen is identical. What's not identical is the width of the screen. So on the iPad Pro, you can probably tell it's quite a bit wider in that particular format. The bezel also on the iPad is actually a lot wider, so it makes the device a lot bigger. When you look at the device sideways on, you'll notice that the iPad is actually a lot thinner and the device is slightly lighter as well. So although it's a lot larger device, when you're holding it in your hand, it is actually a lot lighter. Having said that, when I've had the two devices and holding the device for a period of time using one hand and tapping with the other hand, you do find the iPad Pro quite uncomfortable to use for that time. And again, mainly that's down to the kickstand. Probably a feature that wasn't really a design feature is that you can slide your hand underneath the kickstand and it makes it a very comfortable device to hold for long periods of time. So this has become quite a common thing for me and how I use the device now, and it makes it very comfortable for long periods of typing with one hand, typically when you're web browsing and the like, rather than actually working where I'd be using a keyboard attachment. Okay, so let's take a look now at the keyboards on the two devices. So first of all, when the keyboard's attached on the iPad Pro, you can see now that the devices actually, in terms of their actual size profile, are pretty much identical. So first of all, if we take a look at the iPad one, the iPad keyboard's quite different from the Surface keyboard in that it kind of folds out like this and then becomes part of the stand. So we had some fun with some members of staff clipping this together. It took several attempts. As you can see, I've kind of mastered it now, but it does take a bit of getting used to. So if I just log in here on the iPad Pro device, we can see the keyboard sits fairly flat to the desk. Now that for me certainly I found quite uncomfortable. So when you were tapping on the keyboard, you're sort of pretty much pressing on the desk. There was no sort of spring or give in the keys. I also found the keys quite small, so I kept missing keys and clipping other keys when I was typing. So particularly when you're using something like Microsoft Word, and when you were writing in Word, obviously a bit difficult doing it on here, I find it quite sort of clacky, the keyboard, but also the flatness was a problem. The good thing about the keyboard is the fact that it is a spill resistant keyboard, so that it is completely sealed unit. So that means anything that does get knocked over or spilt on it, like a hot drink or something like that, won't actually get inside the keyboard and sort of damage the keyboard. In terms of cost between the two keyboards, they're pretty much identical or very similar pricing between the two. And it is obviously an active device as well, so when you close up the iPad Pro, which requires this kind of folding mechanism, it will actually shut the iPad down there, and you may have been able to hear that click shut. So now let's take a quick look at this Surface Pro keyboard. The Surface Pro keyboard, by contrast, you can see is actually lifted from the desk, so it doesn't actually sit completely flat on the desk. You can have it flat on the desk if you prefer, and you can type with it in that format, but it's much more comfortable to use in that format. We can now see obviously the addition of the touchpad on the device as well. The touchpad meaning that obviously you've now got mouse support, and I'll just log this one in. And obviously now if I'm typing, the keyboard actually is a lot more springy. One of the things that it doesn't have, which the iPad Pro did have, was that spill resistant keyboard. So obviously if you do spill something on this keyboard, unfortunately it will go down inside the keyboard, and the likelihood is you'll be replacing the keyboard. So that's kind of the pro that the iPad has over the Surface Pro. But I think overall, in terms of the keyboards, we did a lot of testing yesterday with staff members in the office, and unanimously the keypad and the keyboard attachment on the Surface Pro was the favoured keyboard device. So I think in terms of keyboards, then the Surface Pro is the better tool for the job. So next we're going to take a quick look at the audio and video capabilities of both devices. I would say from using both devices, the quality of the video, and I'll include in that the cameras on both front and rear, are very similar devices. They're almost indistinguishable in terms of the quality, and they're both really eye-catching screens. When we look at the sound quality though, for me there is a difference between the two. So first of all, if I play the iPad Pro. Can I steal your Wi-Fi connection? Baby, these firewall policies ain't gonna configure themselves, and I'm the one with the server credentials. Hopefully you got a bit of an idea there. That's the latest Sophos video, which we think is absolutely brilliant. Well worth checking out. Sophos's IT love songs, so lots of interesting songs about IT. And this is the Surface Pro now, so just play exactly the same video clip.
Sophos presents the IT Love Song Collection.
Hey there, can I steal your Wi-Fi connection?
Baby, these firewall policies ain't gonna configure themselves. And I'm the one with the server credentials.
So I think certainly for me the difference between the two devices there is the bass, and the bass on the iPad is a lot clearer. And in terms of the volume of both devices, they're both very loud. You've got Dolby Stereo on both devices as well, so they're both really good quality pieces of audio. But for me, definitely the iPad would win in terms of the audio quality. In terms of screen resolution though, in terms of watching a film, that type of thing, both devices perform equally well. So next thing we're going to take a look at is the interfaces on the two devices, and the first thing you'll notice from the iPad device, the iPad Pro, is that it looks exactly the same as the iPads have always looked. So you've got the familiar tile layout. It's quite a surprise to me that Apple haven't yet taken a step to update the iOS operating system and refresh that screen, because I think it really does need a refresh now, having seen many of the other devices on the market. One thing they have added though is this screen on the left hand side, which shows a Siri view of kind of things that you may be interested in. For example, the latest news articles, very, very similar to what Microsoft did with Cortana. If I take a quick flick back across here now, I can open up, for example, Microsoft Word, which I have activated on the iPad. One new feature is this ability to pull applications in from the side. Quite a useful one. So if I've got here, I've got my PowerPoint application open here, and I can then obviously open up the slides that I'm particularly interested in, or I could flick through to something else. So bringing in another application is actually quite easy on here. It just requires a drag down from the top, and I quite like that feature. Putting Excel side by side, very, very quick and easy. One thing you will notice if you're a frequent user of products like Microsoft Office is that the feature menu is very, very limited on the iPad Pro, and that's by design. Microsoft want you to have the best operating system on Microsoft products on a Microsoft device. And of course, the side-by-side Windows feature has been available since Windows 8.0 within the Windows operating system family. And also with Microsoft now, with Windows 10, we have the ability to snap 4 windows side-by-side. On the iPad, it's simply 2. I have to say, it's not a feature that I would use heavily on a Surface or an iPad Pro device if I was using either, unless I was attaching it to an external screen. Because really, to get the best benefit from having applications side-by-side, you need a lot of screen estate to do that. So next we're going to take a look at the Surface Pro device and look at some of the similar features. So looking at Cortana first of all, when I open up Cortana, it will automatically bring in for me news articles, very, very similar to what we just saw on Siri there, things that we might be interested in, and it's a quick at a glance kind of look at your world and your diary and things like that as well will be pulled into that. Looking at the actual layout of the interface, mine's fairly tidy. I've got mine organised in various different groups. So I've got my business applications, I've got my utilities, I've got things like personal and news and media. Obviously, if you're doing that on the iPad Pro, what you'd probably do is you'd have separate screens for those particular sets of icons, but I can see everything on one screen here. I also have the ability to customize the icons to choose what size I want them to be, and I can have them even smaller than these devices. So you can see some of the icons are quite large, like my mail application, which I'll use quite regularly, and some of them are quite small, like the PowerPoint ones down here, and perhaps the Maps application. If I wanted to do something similar like the side-by-side applications, first of all, if I open up my Word document here, which I've obviously got preloaded, if I then decide I want to actually put that into side-by-side mode, if I pull it from the side a bit like we did in the iPad Pro, I actually get the message center from Microsoft, which shows all of my various options here. I can turn it out of tablet mode, I can switch on and off Wi-Fi and various other features. So it's basically access to the settings, but in a very quick way. I also get alerts from all my applications appearing in here as well. So that's quite a useful thing. So how do I actually put this into side-by-side mode? I simply take it from the top and then move it across to the left-hand side. I then get the choice immediately of what I'd like to tile it against. So I can see everything quickly and easily at a quick view there. So in this case, I'm going to put Excel side by side with my Word application, and you can see there I now have my Excel application open, and obviously I have my Word application side by side. I can choose how big or how small I make those, similar to what we saw on the iPad. And obviously if I was perhaps just looking at a news feed from a website, I might have it just in a very, very narrow window. Again, it's not a feature that I'm going to use heavily on either device if I was using either of them for a long period of time. The likelihood is it would be when I'm projecting to an external screen that these features become quite useful. Okay, so let's think about now the conclusion between the two devices. So first of all, let's just quickly recap on some of the pros and cons. I think in terms of the things that were very, very equal, we've got the quality of both screens. They're very, very high quality, high resolution. The camera is very, very similar front and rear on the two devices, so there's nothing really to distinguish the two apart. In terms of audio, then definitely the iPad Pro would be my preference. It's much deeper bass on there, so if I was listening to audio directly on the device, this would be a preferable device to use over the Surface. In terms of watching videos and things like that, again, very, very similar. Battery life, the iPad Pro probably wins in terms of battery life. When we switch off the iPad Pro and we put it in sleep mode and we do the same with the Surface Pro, we find that the Surface Pro battery will drain much quicker. So this one definitely has the edge over there. When it came to keyboards, definitely the Surface Pro was the winner. The fact that it's a backlit keyboard on the Surface Pro, the fact that it's angled, the fact it's actually a lot thinner and it feels much more natural when you're typing, compared to really the iPad's very, very flat keyboard, which feels very clacky when you're typing on it, but also has the spill resistant cover, which is actually one of the kind of benefits of that. In terms of overall power, the Surface Pro seems to have the edge on the iPad Pro, which would be understandable given the chipsets inside the two devices. And in terms of operating system, Apple really have stuck with iOS on this device, which for me, if they were serious in creating a competitor for the Surface Pro, they would have gone for the more natural OS X operating system to give that wider business application support. So for me, in terms of a pure business device and a business tool, the iPad Pro loses out against the Surface device. The Surface really is a much stronger competitor in that business space. In terms of using them both as tablet devices, both perform well, but in terms of the battery life, you would probably say that the iPad Pro is a better device if you're using pure tablet mode. And I would say moreover, things like basic web browsing, email, I wouldn't like to type on this all day, whereas with the Surface I do, and it works absolutely fine for long periods of time. So I would conclude in saying that as a business device, definitely the Surface Pro is the device. As an occasional use business tool, then the iPad Pro is a good secondary device, but certainly couldn't replace a primary device.